How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. I am at the end of this cold. I have my energy back. It's just like draining all the time. It's terrible. In today's video, I've got 3 topics to cover. The first one is that the PS5 Pro retains a missing feature from the PS5, but it shouldn't matter and it's going to be fixed soon. Second on the list, Sony is forcing PS Plus Premium on yet another game that I really wanted to play. And finally, game prices are out of control and I'm going to call it out. All right, let's jump into this PS5 Pro news topic because this is a feature that's kind of been hanging over the PS5's head for a while, and a lot of people were assuming that it would be fixed for the PS5 Pro, but it doesn't look like it's going to be fixed at launch, but Sony is aware of it. And the feature I'm talking about is variable refresh rate. So if your TV or monitor that you're using with your PS5 supports VRR, it's basically like a cure-all for all these games that run between 50 and 60 FPS. It essentially takes those frame drops and smooths them out. So while you'll probably still notice them, you'll notice them a lot less because it's smoothing out the time that it takes for each frame to show to make it look and feel more consistent. This all started on PC with NVIDIA's G-Sync and FreeSync from AMD. They're the same thing. It's just variable refresh rate monitors, and it's a good feature because if you were broke like me in college, I only could afford like mid to low end graphics cards. So even at 1080p, I could hit 60 FPS a lot of the time, but I'd still get those frame drops from my lower end CPU that would keep me in the 50 to 60 range, and variable refresh rate, G-Sync at the time, would really do a good job at smoothing that out. But variable refresh rate, the one kind of thorn in its side is that it works really good in specific ranges. So on the PS5, I think it's like 48 to 60 FPS is where VRR will kick in, and if the game drops below that threshold of like 48 FPS or whatever, then you'll start to see those jittery frames, you'll see the stuttering, and everything that you want to have VRR on for will effectively not work if you drop below that frame threshold. And at the beginning of the generation, that wasn't that big of a deal because if you got frame drops at all, it was like a temporary 1 frame 59 FPS drop and then everything was fine. But as the generation has gone on and we've gotten more games that are actually next gen, the performance modes, they run all over the place. Final Fantasy 16, Alan Wake 2, Space Marine 2, the list goes on and on. Basically, if it's a third-party game with a performance mode, you're almost never going to hit a lock 60 and you will drop below that VRR threshold, which will make the frame rate look terrible. So over on the Xbox Series X and on PC, they have a thing called low frame rate compensation, where if you drop below that threshold, it'll still do its best to smooth out those frames and keep things looking as smooth as possible. It's not going to look as good as if you are within that threshold, but it's not going to be this huge lurch to a much lower FPS that the PS5 does not have this feature. So you will see that lurch whenever you drop below the threshold. And a lot of people were hoping that the PS5 Pro would include low frame rate compensation, and unfortunately it isn't. But Digital Foundry, they've been the ones beating the drum on this for the longest time, and they went ahead and reached out to Sony about this. And unlike usual, where Sony just waffles and says like, oh, thanks for letting us know, they said this time that they're aware of it and that they're currently investigating how to implement this feature on the PS5 and the PS5 Pro. So when they do implement it soon, it won't just support the PS5 Pro, it'll also come over to the PS5, which is great because any feature that the Series X has should be over on the PS5. I just don't really care at that point. With how expensive the PS5 Pro is, with how premium the marketing has been surrounding the PS5, I want it to have every feature that the Series X has and more. I talk about this a lot on Deck Ready, and me personally, as I've gotten older, I just want convenience and I want the most consistency out of a game possible. I like when games can run over 120 FPS on my PC. At that point, I will lock the frame rate to 120, but 9 times out of 10, I'm just happy to lock a game at 60 FPS, even if I can run it at 80 or 90 FPS, because I just don't like inconsistency in frame rate. And when I'm on my Steam Deck, I play at 30 FPS all the time. It's absolutely fine. And on my PS5, I use the quality mode if the performance mode is all over the place. And I don't have it in me anymore to really care all that much, because at the end of the day, the developers aren't optimizing their games. And I want to play some of these games, so I don't buy them at launch. I wait for some patches. And if it just becomes a lost cause where developers aren't going to optimize their games to run at 60, that sucks. I'll just use the quality mode, because most of the time the quality mode does run at a locked 30 FPS, and that's just how I live my life now. So if you're one of these people who really wants to have 60 FPS and everything, I'm beating the same drum, but I'm just not letting that stop me from playing games I want to play anymore, because there's a lot of games coming out like Silent Hill 2 that I want to play, and I can say with full transparency and honesty, if I didn't have my PS5 Pro pre-order locked in for just a couple of weeks from now, and I didn't have a ton of games on my plate right now for horror month like Silent Hill 1, Silent Hill 3, Conscript, if I didn't have all these caveats, I would be fine playing Silent Hill 2 at this 30 FPS mode. But like, if I just wait till November 10th when I get my PS5 Pro, I'll presumably be able to run the current mode at 60 FPS. And then eventually there will be a full-on PS5 Pro patch. So once again, I'm being rewarded for waiting, so why not just wait? As far as variable refresh rate goes, I love this feature. I think it's awesome. I wish we had it more in the last generation of consoles, and I'm glad that it's on Sony's radar, because it just like, it's another one of those features like 1440p support and unlocking the SSD that should have been there at launch. And while it is a better late than never situation, I just feel like they should just be better about this stuff going forward, making sure it's there at launch. So the more we talk about these features, the more we get them implemented on the current generation of PS5, the more likely they are to be included at launch on the PS6 and beyond. So yeah, it's worth complaining about this stuff, and I'm glad once again that Digital Foundry is the ones who have the technical know-how to kind of compare these things between consoles, and they're calling out the publishers for doing so. Second on the list, I gotta complain about one of my favorite publishers who, I don't know, they're kind of misstepping a little bit lately, and it's Capcom. So for the past few years, Capcom has been absolutely holy to me. They've been at the top of my pyramid in terms of game fandom. They've been just hitting it out of the park with every release, whether it's Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil 4 Remake, Resident Evil Village, all the updates they did to bring those games into the next gen. They've been knocking it out of the park, and all of them performed really good on the PlayStation 5. But then, starting with Dragon's Dogma 2, I would say, they've really started to kind of get ahead of themselves, releasing these games buggy and like not running right. Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster really left a bad taste in my mouth with all the censorship and how much easier they made that game. You guys know how excited I was for that game. I ended up getting it early, and I played it the night I got it, and I got to the courtyard thinking that it was easier because I was already level 12 by the end of the prologue. You just get so much more XP for taking pictures. I got to the courtyard where the convicts are. I had 4 survivors following me, and I had a pistol, and I was able to kill the convicts. Now, I just replayed the original Dead Rising, and convicts are like a mid-game boss for me because they're just so difficult unless you have enough health. And I was like, yeah, this is just way too easy. There's no veteran mode or anything, and then there's a ton of censorship. They changed a bunch of characters for no reason, and I don't know. I don't really like that. And now they've got this PS Plus situation happening that started with Resident Evil's Director's Cut. So if you didn't know, a lot of these PS Plus classic games that are on the PS1, PS2, and PSP, if you own them in your account, you're able to download them for free. And I own a lot of these games because I played a lot of them on the PlayStation Vita. But with Resident Evil's Director's Cut and now Dino Crisis, Capcom has not only locked them behind a PS Plus subscription, but they don't even have the full feature set like trophy support included with these games. And a lot of people are mad at Sony about this, and I don't understand why, because as far as I can tell, it's not Sony. I mean, Killzone Liberation, Resistance Retribution, all the Sly games, all the Jack games, everything that's available in the classics, I own these games except for Sly 1, and I was able to download all of them for free with my purchase that I had during the Vita and PS3 generation, carrying forward all the way until now. All of those games have new trophy support and a new emulator, and while the emulator isn't great, it's nice to see that Sony is honoring my purchase I made over 10 years ago this far into the future. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not Sony, and it is Capcom, and I don't really like this practice. You shouldn't hide these things behind a ridiculous subscription paywall. I understand Nintendo's doing it, and no one will ever criticize them for anything, like selling these virtual console games every generation, whether it's the Wii, the DS, the 3DS, and now the Switch. They sell you the same game over and over again. They don't let you transfer your purchases at all, but that's not an excuse for developers like Capcom to be able to do this. And the funny thing is, I own Dino Crisis. I bought it and the second game on the Vita the first day that the PS1 classics became available on the Vita, and I'm not able to take advantage of owning that game, and I'm not subscribing to PS Plus to play a PS1 game. I'll emulate it on my Steam Deck before I pay for a subscription service to play a game that I have bought multiple times. I had it on the PS1, I had it on the PlayStation Store. I'm not buying it again through a subscription service to be able to play a game I already own. I'll just emulate it on the Steam Deck, and I'll get a better experience than Sony's subpar emulator that they have on the PS5. I really hope that when the PS5 Pro is out and the hardware kind of cools down for a little bit on the Sony front, they kind of reevaluate the structure of PS Plus Essential, Extra, and Premium, because while they all three have gotten better ever since they came out in their rush job sort of tiered structure that they did a couple of years ago, I feel like it needs a little bit more time in the oven. They need to take a step back, reevaluate, and just get these features up and running in a way that rewards consumers for how expensive they are. But yeah, if you were hoping to play Dino Crisis, which is an incredible Resident Evil style game that Capcom has totally neglected since the one that came out on Xbox that sucked. I think it was like a twin stick shooter instead of a survival horror game. You're SOL unless you have a PS Plus subscription. I would say just emulate it on your PC, or if you have a gaming handheld like the Steam Deck, or you still have your PS Vita kicking around, play it that way, because that's a much better buying process than what you have currently on the PS5. Hopefully Capcom reverts course before they get a little too greedy, because I'm not liking the trends that I'm seeing from them lately, and I feel like they deserve to be called out. Anyway, that brings us to the third news story here, which is that game prices, they're absolutely getting out of control. I gotta give credit to Push Square for writing this article, because this is something that I've talked about a little bit on the channel over the past couple of years, and I think the whole experience is just getting worse. So if you didn't know, there's a new trend that started with a lot of multiplayer games in the past couple of years, where when you're waiting for the release date, there's an ultimate edition available that will be $10 or $20 more, and if you pay that $10 or $20, you get quote-unquote early access to the game. Now this is just a trick. It's not early access to the game, it's charging more to play the game on launch. And while at first you would just get some cosmetics and maybe the season pass for all the DLC and future updates that would come to the game, now it's turned into a thing where with single player games, you'll get some skins for the campaign, you'll get early access, and maybe a digital art book or soundtrack. And while again, it used to be just multiplayer games doing this, I'm seeing it a lot more with single player games. Those games being Space Marine 2, my game of the year so far. You could pay $100 to play it basically a week early and get early access. And then of course there's Silent Hill 2, the latest third-party exclusive from Sony. You could pay $80 to play it early, and the most egregious example of this was Star Wars Outlaws. They doubled the price of the game to play it a week early, which was $130, and the biggest problem with this is, even though it's technically the release date of the game because they're just charging you more to play it on day one, every single one of these games has had issues except for Silent Hill 2. So the servers for Space Marine 2 were a mess the entire early access week, and there was no compensation done by Saber or Focus Entertainment for that, so they charged people to play the game early but didn't do anything to remedy the problems. And then with Star Wars Outlaws, they made people revert their saves. So like if you played for the early access period, they put out a patch within the first week of that game being available and said, hey, if you were in that early access period, you essentially have to convert your save and start the entire game over. And if you don't do it, you might run into some game-breaking bugs later on in the game. So not only are they charging people more to play the game on release date, they're providing less of a finished product for those people who are paying more than the people who just pay the $70 to play it on the actual official release date. And of course, like most terrible things in the industry, like paying for online services, PS Plus Extra and Premium being a thing at all, and now this all starts with Xbox. I know people get mad when I blame things on Xbox, but once again, they're the progenitors of this. If you remember way back when Forza Horizon 5 came out, it's been a few years at this point, they released the game on Game Pass Ultimate. So if you had Ultimate, you could play the game for free, but there's a premium version of the game that came along with expansions, car passes, and everything like that. And if you had the Game Pass Ultimate version, you could pay $30 to play the game early, and Xbox saw a lot of people do that. So then with Starfield, they did the same thing. If you bought the Ultimate Edition of Starfield, you could play the early access version, get the DLC Shattered Space for free, and everything would be fine for you. And then of course they saw that work as well, so everyone else followed suit. And I don't want to blame Xbox too much because, you know, there's nothing forcing these companies to do this, but once again, they're always the company who does the crappy thing first to kind of break the dam, and then everyone else floods floods through with these bad practices, and I don't think this should be a thing anymore. But yeah, there's a great breakdown of it over on Push Square, which is of course my favorite PlayStation-oriented news site. But once again, thanks for bearing with me during this week while I've been recovering from this cold. I know it makes my voice more annoying than usual, so I appreciate you guys sitting through it. Watch time, ironically, has been much higher than usual, so maybe I should talk deeper in my normal voice when I'm not sick. But yeah, guys, that's all I've got for this video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.